So we do have, I'll go ahead and get started and just tell a little bit about this group. Race and Reconciliation has been meeting for about 2 years or so, maybe a little bit longer. And we do have the monthly programs and address different issues related to race and reconciliation and helping raise awareness for some of the issues that are pertinent to our community. And tonight, this program is a little different from ones we've done in the past, and we're really excited to have guests with us from the International African American Museum that's being built in Charleston. So it's just not too far. And so we'll be talking about that. This program is co-sponsored by York County's ACT, A.C.T. Race Relations and Racial Justice Group. And this group has been meeting, how long, some of the people who are coming in, saw Jim come in. How long have you been meeting about it? Several months, is that correct?
We started last June.
Okay. Do you want to, one of you want to tell us? I don't know who.
Sure, I will. I don't mind at all. Hi, I'm Ann Whitty. I am on the ACT steering committee. There's a bunch of us together here in York, and who are affiliated with York, who joined in on ACT. ACT stands for Accountability, Communication, and Trust, and we are pretty new. We started in June. We had a vigil right after the murder of George Floyd here in York, and it was just a community unity event to just bring people together and say, you know, we are in this together, and we need to recognize what's happening in our country. And so we've kind of spawned from there, and it just has kind of built, and we've been able to have a prayer vigil, and we had a unity rally right before the election, just to say, you know, this country has a lot of healing to do. And so that's really kind of what we're about. And we're very excited to be with you guys tonight. And I see a bunch of faces on the screen from York, so I'm really excited to see all of these people. And we appreciate all you have offered as Race and Reconciliation, the information and the help kind of getting our feet underneath us as well. So we are glad to be here. And if anybody else from the ACT steering committee wants to jump in and say anything, please feel free.
We also would be happy to publicize anything that you're doing through our group. We have an email list, which includes a lot of you, that is about 135, 140 people. So we're happy to send those things out as well. And other groups in the community too that are carrying out similar work. I think there's a lot of different groups, and we all have our own kind of little slice of it, but a lot of times there's overlap between those. So tonight we have with us Brenda Tindall, who is the museum's Director of Education and Engagement, and Reverend Jenkins, who is Lilly Director of Faith-Based Education and Engagement. And they're going to talk about the museum and give us a little bit of an overview about the museum and its mission, and then do some discussion about the exhibits and how they will be done in this museum, and then highlight some of the ongoing outreach that is happening. And that will continue to be happening. So I want to introduce them first. We have Brenda Tindall. She is an award-winning educator, scholar, and museum practitioner. Prior to joining the International African American Museum, Tindall was the Director of Education at the Detroit Historical Society, where she oversaw education initiatives, public programming, and provided organization in the areas of content development, museum visitor experience, and strategic engagement. In 2003, she launched her career in the museum field at the Levine Museum of the New South in Charlotte, and in 2015 became Levine's first woman and African American to serve as a staff historian and senior vice president of research and collections. During her tenure at Levine, she co-curated numerous impactful exhibits, including the KNOW, and then no in parentheses in the middle, No Justice, No Peace, Rapid Response exhibition in 2017 to 2019, and led numerous community initiatives and partnerships, including the Breaking Bread Dinner and Dialogue series, No Charlotte Enrichment seminars for corporate and non-corporate sectors, and Listen Up Charlotte, a mobile concert series in partnership with the Charlotte Symphony, among others. Tindall is a recipient of numerous awards and fellowships. Most recently, she was awarded the 2020 Museum Leadership Award. Congratulations. One of the highest honors given to mid-career museum professionals for innovation, service, and leadership by the Southeastern Museum Conference. So we're really excited to have her here tonight, and I will introduce Reverend Jenkins when we get ready for her part of the presentation. So I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't begin my portion of the presentation by just extending my gratitude to Sigmund Hewitt, who has been an absolutely wonderful steward of planning tonight's program and communicating with me. He's just been fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Margaret Gilkin, for your thoughtful presentation and introduction, and Reverend Greg Hoffman for your prowess navigating the Zoom forum this evening. I'd also like to just extend my gratitude to Grace Lutheran Church, Race and Reconciliation of Rock Hill, York County's ACT Race Relations and Racial Justice Group. I am just delighted to be able to provide some insight on the International African American Museum and the important work that we are poised to do as a museum, as a memorial, and really as a site of conscience. I will begin my presentation by, if we were in person, I'd likely ask us to do a bit of a call and response. And it would be important to acknowledge that this is indeed Black History Month. And I want to just briefly talk about why it matters, and not just why Black History Month matters, but why Black history and culture matters in general. And I start here because the International African American Museum, and I'll talk about its mission very soon, will ensure that there is not a poverty of imagination around Black history and culture. And most importantly, that it's such a robust culture, both in terms of its local, national, and international contours, that we should be celebrating Black history and culture 365 days a year. I begin here because I think it's important that we situate the International African American Museum within the context of this month, but also so many of us celebrate Black History Month, but don't always know the historical narrative for which gave birth to this important celebratory month. So I thought I'd provide just a little bit of context around the origins of Black history before we proceeded with a more specific conversation about the International African American Museum. It was founded by a trained historian, Carter G. Woodson, who is also known as the father of Black history. Some of you may be absolutely familiar with the Association of African American, of the study of African American life and history, which is really a product of Carter G. Woodson's legacy. But Black History Month, as we know it, actually has roots in the 1920s. Back in February of 1926, Black History Month began as Negro History Week to really commemorate the Black past. And just a fun little fact, Woodson chose February because it encompassed the birthdays of Abraham Lincoln, whose birthday was on February the 12th, and Frederick Douglass, whose birthday is on Valentine's Day. And the point here is to really take a month that gave birth to some important thought leaders and leaders who really mobilized around the concept of emancipation and sought to privilege the Black experience in some really important ways. And so I just thought I'd provide that little tidbit of information. And it wouldn't be until the 1960s that we moved from Negro History Week to Black History Month. And so just a quick little trivia on Black History Month as we move into a more targeted conversation about the International African American Museum. So I want to start by, Black history and culture matters to some of us for a variety of reasons, but for me, it's quite personal. As a museum practitioner and a scholar and educator, Black history matters to me from a vocational perspective, but also I went through a academic experience that was void of African American history and culture. And there were some critical moments in my own sort of development where Black history became very much part of my understanding of my place in the world. And I just have some photos of a few people who symbolize those critical moments in my own cultural awakening about my heritage. J.A. Delane, who has roots in South Carolina, and is deeply important to the history of the Brown v. Board of Education decision, was one of the first exhibitions I worked on at Levine Museum of the New South, exhibit called Courage that really sought to commemorate the anniversary of Brown v. Board of Education, the 50th anniversary back in 2003. But the story of South Carolina and its critical role in the landmark decision of Brown v. Board of Education was almost one of the first times, if you will, that I understood this landmark decision as having a local gravitas. So often when I learned about Brown v. Board of Education, which helped secure more integrated public schools, I learned about it as a national concept and not as a local one. And I share that because local history has a great deal of value. The International African American Museum will be looking at local, national, and international histories, so that it doesn't take me becoming a museum professional and going through much of my education, both K through 12, college, before I learned about the important role that South Carolina played in such a landmark decision. And then you have Alice Walker to your far right, noted writer and activist, Color Purple. So many of us know her through that, but I worked on her collection at Emory University, processing her personal papers. And my philosophy as a historian and as a museum practitioner has been deeply framed by what I encountered in that collection. While working on that collection in 2008, I believe, I ran across a little sticky note in her collection. And on that sticky note was written in her long hand, it said, "People are known by the records they keep. If it isn't in the record, it will be said that it did not happen. That's what history is, a keeping of records." And I almost lost my breath reading that, because so much of American history, African American history, has been lost because we have not taken the time to tell those untold stories, to chart a more a nuanced course as it relates to our stories. And so Alice Walker's longhand comment sort of reminded me of the importance of keeping records and the importance of charting the historical narratives that museums, particularly history museums, are known for. And finally, Sojourner Truth, right here in the middle, she actually was the germ of my interest in African American history and culture. And if I could tell a quick story, when I was in high school, my debate coach, Barbara Smith, who was just fantastic. She asked me to read a document that was actually written by a woman named Isabel Gumphrey, which is actually Sojourner Truth. And she said, "I want you to go read this document and then come back to me and tell me what you learned." And so the document that she gave me was written in 1851. And it was written as an address to a a conference of ministers and activists for a women's sort of an abolitionist meeting. And can I share with you what was written in that document, just really briefly? Just close your eyes for a second and think that it's 1851. And Sojourner Truth walks on the podium. And this is what she said. That man over there said that a woman needs to be helped in the carriages and lifted over ditches, and to have the best place everywhere, you see. Nobody ever helped me in the carriages or over mud puddles or gives me a best place. And ain't I a woman? Look at me. Look at my arm, you see. Eyes plowed and planted and gathered into barns. And you know what? No man could head me. And ain't I a woman? I could work as much and eat as much as a man if I could get to it, and bear the lash as well. And ain't I a woman? That man in black there said that a woman can't have as much rights as a man because Christ wasn't a woman. Well, where did your Christ come from? From God and a woman. Man had nothing to do with him. If the first woman God ever made was strong enough to turn the world upside down all alone, together, women ought to be able to turn it right side up again. You're gonna open your eyes. My friends, that was my introduction to African American history and culture, to the experiences of men and women prior to 1865, prior to the Civil War, and the courage of people like Sojourner Truth to step on a stage and stake her claim in emancipation. I want young people to walk into the International African American Museum and see themselves, and see Sojourner Truth, and see J.A. Delane, and see Alice Walker, and see their grandmothers. And that is what we are hoping to do, is to make the history of Black people, local, national, and international, more acceptable, more accessible. And so our mission is really to honor the untold stories of the African American journey at one of our country's most sacred sites. And I can't think of a more important way to make an intervention in the story of American history than to create a monument to a global Black history and culture. The museum, as we talked a little bit about this, the International African American Museum is at a critical moment in its development. One critical moment to date has been our groundbreaking ceremony in October, where we really broke ground and began the important work of building our facility. And this is a photograph of members of our board of directors who are staking their claim in the construction of this important institution. And since some of you, and I'm not sure if everyone on this call had an opportunity to visit our website to perhaps see some of the footage from this event, there's yet another important moment that I'd like to draw your attention to, and I have just a brief video to show so that you can also be there in some ways, be there to experience another critical moment, which was our topping out ceremony in July 2020. And so if you give me just a moment, I'd like to share this 3-minute video so that you can begin to visualize our current construction site and the gravitas of this important institution.
In this moment, I come as one, but stand as 10,000. These are words by Maya Angelou that I think really fit this occasion today. I stand on behalf of our amazing staff, but more importantly, the ancestors that we honor at this very site through our mission.
Today is a day of thanks and gratitude. We thank you for the beautiful ancestors' feet that have touched this soil 400 plus years ago. Their feet has brought good news on today for the symbolic completion of the structural phase of the International African American Museum.
At this extraordinary moment when people across our country are confronting racial injustice in remarkable ways, including protest marches with unprecedented diversity, the need for this museum is undeniable. All the work that will go into this museum, including the carefully laying 265,000 bricks, each task, each person is not just doing that work, they are building a great institution that will be of enormous value to our country and to the world.
So today, we are really thrilled to have this opportunity to celebrate a key step in our museum's future.
Today is the day to celebrate not bringing things down, but putting things up. Lifting up this last piece of steel. And y'all, a piece of steel is symbolic of something so strong. And it's our resolve to tell the stories never told, to inspire our citizens, to lift all of our spirits, and have a commitment, a steely commitment for equity, justice, and liberty for all in our city and our country. Please join me as we count down the lift of the final piece of steel. Ready? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Take her away.
So with that, I thank you all again for your attendance, for your support of this museum, and we look forward to your continuing support as this project goes forward.
I tell you, I get emotional seeing this video, in part because when Mayor Riley made the clarion call back in 2020 to build this institution, I'm sure the weight of this particular moment really just landed on him in a manner that just sort of, made powerful that clarion call for 2020, right? That 20 years later, we are now officially real. We hope to open this incredible institution in 2022. So not too long from now, we will have an institution that you all will be able to visit. But I wanted to, at the very least, put you there for just a moment by sharing with you this video. And now I'd like to turn to just some very specific details about the visitor experience, about what people can expect to experience at the International African American Museum, and give you just a teaser in terms of the different galleries and exhibitions that will be available to our amazing community. this is actually our floor plan. I wanted to just provide a sort of a global view of our building so that you can get a sense of its layout. I won't talk about each one of these areas of our museum, but I will tell you that we will have roughly 40,000 square feet of interpretation and exhibition space, and that includes our external African Ancestral Memorial Garden, as well as our internal exhibition spaces. And so you'll see we have the Center for Family History, our changing exhibition galleries right in this area, American Journeys, which I'm just naming them now, but I'll give you some specific details in just a second. Transatlantic galleries, our Orientation Theater, our Gullah Geechee Gallery, South Carolina Connections, Studio Time, which will be our really a meeting space and a place for educational workshops. We will also, if I can move my, there we go. We also have a gallery entitled African Roots, African Routes, Atlantic Worlds, Carolina Gold, and Passages. And I call the names of those spaces with a lot of pride because what I think we have here is a monument to local, national, and international Black history and culture. And I'm using the term Black very specifically because that term allows for our visitors and our interpretation to speak to, again, the global dimensions of the histories that we'll be touching on in our institution and through our programming. All right. And again, more global. Our interpretation and the design strategy is quite diverse. Visitors will have an opportunity to engage with ambient audio experiences, narrative presentations, very immersive environmental spaces. We have modular, flexible parts of the experience. Of course, there will be very didactic opportunities to engage with content, workshops, interactive, dialogic, story booths, and of course, especially in this time of COVID-19, we are really thinking about what it means to interface with our museum and with our content vis-a-vis mobile and remote opportunities. And so just wanted to give you a kind of an overarching sense of the different ways that visitors will have to interface with our content and with our visitor experience. This is a graphic elevation of our African Ancestral Memorial Garden, which is being constructed by the amazing Walter Hood, our landscape architect. It will include installations, a variety of botanical installations, that some of which will be native to the area. Others will be native to places throughout the African diaspora, particularly West and West Central Africa. It will be a place of reflection and contemplation. And most importantly, in many ways, this will be part of our museum complex that is open to the public for free. And so visitors to Charleston will have an opportunity to engage with the International African American Museum even after hours in our African Memorial Garden. And this is just, when I say this, this doesn't even give you the full gravitas of this experience. We have water features. We have a steel beam that marks the wharf line of Gaston's Wharf, where historians have argued that nearly just under 50% of enslaved men, women, and children that came through the transatlantic slave trade likely entered through Gaston's Wharf. So, you know, it really just sort of speaks to how important Charleston is to the history of enslavement, the transatlantic trade, but most importantly, it's ground zero for Black history and culture. We'll have a orientation theater that will introduce our visitors to the overarching visitor experience. We will be having a well-produced, I would even call it a sort of blockbuster filmic experience in this orientation theater. We hope to also convene other screenings as well as potential workshops for educational purposes. I spoke of the local, but I just want to draw your attention to one gallery that centers on South Carolina, the state-wide African American history and culture. It's our South Carolina Connections Gallery. You'll note on the walls we have interpretation. The walls are namely about placing into context the history and culture of African Americans in South Carolina, really largely in the 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th, and 21st centuries. The hope is to talk about the people on our walls, but then we'll have a dialectic experience. You'll note this table here, which will be an interactive table that will be a placemaking experience. So while our walls will talk about people and events, this table will be an opportunity to connect our visitors to different sites throughout South Carolina that has unique ties to African and African American history and culture. And so we're just excited about the opportunity to add an interactive element, but also to highlight not just the important history of African Americans in Charleston, but throughout the state. And so this will be one way that we hope to tell that story. Another locally based gallery at the museum will be our Carolina Gold Gallery. And this is perhaps one of the areas that I believe will bring out an emotional latitude because we will be talking about rice cultivation and the ways in which that shaped the plantation complex in a place like Charleston. We will also, however, we really want to make sure we draw those diasporic connections. And so while we talk about rice cultivation, the horrors of plantation labor, the labor system, we also talk about the ingenuity that West and West Central African people brought with them to the very process of rice cultivation. And so on the one hand, what we're really trying to do is really strike a balance between both the horrors of enslavement and yet the humanity and the ingenuity that certainly shaped the ways in which enslaved people informed the culture and the technologies that supported, unfortunately, this system of enslavement. And so this gallery will place that into context. Adjacent to that gallery, and I don't have an image of this, will be another wall of interpretation called Memories of the Enslaved. And the point here is to make sure that enslaved people have voices, that we give them agency in the context of our narrative, that we not only talk about their history, but we let them talk about their experiences. And so that part of the interpretation is really elevating the voice and perspective of enslaved people using WPA narratives, as well as a number of incredible artifacts that I believe will help enliven that story in some really important ways. So I'm moving from local to national. And I showed you on the layout, our American Journeys Gallery, which in many ways is our sort of American History 101, largely from the 1500s to the present. This gallery really charts the African-American experience from the transatlantic trade all the way up to Black Lives Matter movement. We want to be sure that people understand that what's happening in the contemporary moment doesn't happen in a vacuum. So while this is also a national narrative, We are intentional about integrating local narratives as well as international stories that help provide a much more panoramic understanding of Black history and culture. This will perhaps be one of our most dynamic exhibition spaces, not simply because of the sheer amount of information and the long history that is charted here, but it will also include artifacts. You see some of the large cases here. Artifacts, we have a number of interactives and media programs that places history into conversation with contemporary issues. We have lots of imagery and text that really help to tell this story in some really dynamic ways. And so I personally think that American Journeys will be really important for our K through 12 audiences in particular, because it tells a story that is critical to social studies, most social study textbooks, but it's using an African-American and frankly, a Black global lens to really deliver that story. So we're really excited about the important ways this will shape an understanding for multiple audiences. And now we move into the global. The Atlantic Worlds Gallery, which is our largest space in the museum, to me is what I call the soul of the museum. And it's the soul because you literally walk into this space, into the Atlantic Ocean. So you see the vista here. You see that vista, which is largely Charleston Harbor, and we want people to imagine Charleston Harbor as being, you know, an extension of the Atlantic and likely the place that men, women, and children crossed to enter Charleston proper. This space is an area of interpretation I think is deeply important to understanding Black culture as a global experience. We'll be talking about not simply West and West Central Africa and Charleston. We'll also be talking about the ways in which the transatlantic trade as well as other experiences shape the larger Black experience in places like Europe and South America, and of course in coastal and interior parts of West and West Central Africa, and of course in the Americas, in North America. And so you'll really have an opportunity to see how Black history and culture is so multi-layered and multi-dimensional, global, and dynamic. We also have a number of media experiences in here that will also tell that story, and that's along this large wall here. And I should note that these media elevations some of them are a bit dated, but it gives you just a sense of the richness of this space, the kinds of media experiences and the interpretation that we hope to make possible in this space. You can't really see this really well, but this is also a interpretation area. It's a long sort of triangular wall, if you will, that interprets the Middle Passage in particular. And we have a real important accountability to telling that story because it's probably one of the most, when we talk about rice cultivation as being quite dangerous and quite dehumanizing and scary, the Middle Passage is very much part of the horrors of the transatlantic trade and ultimately what would happen on the domestic front. So we interpret that narrative there. I should also note that this is one of our modular spaces. So the seating in this area is meant to be movable. This space, because it's one of our larger spaces, will be a venue that we'll use for public programs and for events. And so it just gives you a sense of how, as a museum, we have to think about the diversity of ways we hope to utilize our venue to interface with community members. This is another graphic elevation of additional dimension of our global landscape and interpretation, we have a gallery called African Roots, African Routes, which really pays close attention to pre-colonial African history, with a focus on West Africa and West Central Africa. And then there is a adjacent wall that talks about the African diaspora. And by diaspora, we mean the places outside of the continent of Africa. And so we talk about the ways in which African American, Black history and culture really flourish both in West and West Central Africa, and as well as outside of West Central Africa. And, you know, I think our Center for Family History, which will be a destination for genealogical research, is going to be so deeply important. And so when I talk about Black history being personal, this is where things get real personal when you start tracing your own genealogy and your family history. Our Center for Family History will be one of the premier sites for doing that work with a specific interest in African American history and culture. And I say that because we know about the Wall of 1877, right? Where there's a lot of Black people haven't always been documented in national records. And so being able to help, our visitors, learn about different strategies for studying their own family histories, learning about the documents and primary sources and different ways you can gather that history will be deeply important. I hope that, as I shared with Sigmund a few weeks ago when we talked about this program, that if we have an opportunity to come back, that we will invite our director, Tony Carrier, to talk a bit about the various resources that we already have available on our website. And I'm happy to share that link with you after tonight's program. But to also just begin to showcase some of the collections, the digital collections, the programming and workshops that we're already engaged in to help our visitors and community members begin to do genealogical research. This is probably one of the parts of the museum that I am so excited about because of its potential to really help people draw those personal connections to our global narrative and their personal stories. And then, of course, and I'll go quickly here because I know I want to make sure my colleague has an opportunity to talk a bit about the amazing work she's doing for faith-based education and engagement. But the Education and Engagement Department writ large has a diversity of ways that we hope to connect with community members. Strategic partnerships and community engagement is the heart and soul of our department. And we've already struck up a number of strategic partnerships and collaborations. I've just included some of them here. The National Museum of African American History and Culture, the Association of African American Museums, Study Al-Islam, Charleston County Public Library, Halsey Institute of Contemporary Art. Soon we'll be able to add Race and Reconciliation of Rock Hill, York County's Act Race Relations, among others, to this wall of partnerships and collaboration. But I just wanted to give you a sense of sort of the ways in which we're doing the work already and we're not open. And I use the framing of being a museum without walls. We don't have a building yet to convene and to engage with community, but we're getting out there. We're on Zoom calls like tonight. We're on the phone. We're doing lots of great digital programming so that we're connecting and creating an appetite for what is to come. We're also, again, international. One of the things that we did in 2019 that 2018, 2019 that I'm really proud of is that we're not just interpreting the West and West Central Africa or the African world, if you will. We're also connecting with them. We went to Sierra Leone, Freetown, Sierra Leone in 2010 to do research and to connect with some of our civic and educational partners there. And what we decided to do was to also trace the relationship between Bunce Island in Freetown, Sierra Leone and Gadsden's Wharf. And what we learned is that there was a direct, I think the data suggests that roughly 90% of men and women coming from Bunce Island likely landed in Gadsden's Wharf at some point. And so there's this tremendous relationship between Charleston and Bunce Island. And to really take that data further, we were able to broker a sister city relationship between Charleston and Freetown. So there is some ongoing cultural exchange between the city of Freetown and Charleston today in the contemporary moment. So we want to use history to build community, and that's super important, both locally, nationally, and internationally. I'll move past some of this. I do want to mention that we do a number of other sort of community-oriented events. We haven't been able to obviously do them in person, but we've done a number of pop-up community listening sessions where we have an opportunity to apprise community members about where we are in the process of the development and to also solicit feedback. We hope to do more of that, particularly around our content and interactive experiences as we move forward. And I shared with Sigmund, I'd love to come back and share with you and get your feedback on where we are with many of our visitor experiences that we want to pilot before we actually activate as part of our on-site experience. A couple of signature programs. We've already launched our scholarly lecture series. The first two included a fireside chat with Henry Louis Gates and a fireside chat with David Blight. You can't get more powerful than that in terms of scholars who are doing important work to tell the story of African and African Americans and to center it in places like Charleston. So we were delighted to be able to host them and do it in collaboration with some of our community partners, including the Citadel and the Halsey Institute of Contemporary Art. We also hosted the incredible Secretary Lonnie Bunch in conversation with Cheryl Finley as part of his book tour. It was fantastic. And interesting enough, it was roughly days before the country shut down. It was the first week of March. And it was probably our last big public program because of COVID-19. And I just remember having to make the announcement that Secretary Bunch would not be shaking hands because some of the restrictions around sort of the communicable dimensions of COVID had become quite part of our rhetoric and our practice at that time. But we enjoyed being able to host him and to learn more about his historic journey as the director of the National Museum of African American History and now the first secretary of the Smithsonian Institute. Talk about moments in Black history. Lonnie Bunch is sort of an exemplar of that. I can't end my presentation without mentioning the work that we hope to do for K through 12 students and educators. We'll obviously be providing all kinds of educational workshops and curated experiences, professional development opportunities for teachers and museum educators, guided experiences, and digital and virtual tools, lesson plans, virtual tours, all kinds of ways to connect our educators and students to our cultural assets. I have a picture of one of the programs that we launched in 2019, which was a cultural passport experience. And the idea was to connect K through 6 students vis-a-vis our partnership with the Charleston Freedom Schools to sites, historic sites, artistic sites, scientific sites that really centered on African and African American history and culture, and to create an appetite for that history. And these are just some of the images from that passport initiative. They literally had a physical passport with their photos. And each time they went to a different place, they got a stamp as if they were traveling. So we use the theme of mobility as a way to really, for them to move through culture, for them to understand and engage with African-American history and culture. So they were funny. I took all of these photos of them, and they had a lot of character. And one of the sites that we went to was MUSC has they have a urban garden. And at the time, the students had an opportunity to learn about the cultivation of sweetgrass. They learned about a West African irrigation vat system. So it was just an opportunity to get them outdoors, but to connect them to really unique parts of Charleston culture and African American history and culture. And then this photograph of, this is my favorite image. And I'll end here and pass it to my colleague, Reverend Jenkins. But this image was of one of our students, our young scholars, during an exhibition at the Gibbs Museum. And this photo is one of my favorites, and I'm actually getting a little emotional thinking about it, because this is how I want, this is how I want every child that comes into our museum, right, to experience our history and culture, to see themselves, to begin to imagine a world anew, where they're part of the story, where they're understood as historic actors, where they belong to a legacy of men, women, and children who may have had, some really, a history steeped in challenges and adversity, but also a history of victors, of people who worked diligently for their emancipation, who created worlds anew despite all of the challenges. I want every person, and definitely every child, to walk in awe. And that picture just captures the awe. And what's beautiful is that this was one of the first times that many of our students actually visited a museum or a cultural site. And I think there will be lots of firsts. And we just can't wait to be able to open our doors to all our diversity of visitors, especially young people, so that we can share the good work that we're doing with the world. And so I'll stop there. I'll hand it over to my colleague, and then we look forward to Q&A, if that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I just cannot wait to come. And as an educator, I applaud you for all the work that you're doing. I want to introduce our second speaker. The Reverend Demet E. Jenkins was born in France and raised in Charleston, South Carolina. She earned her degree in criminal justice from the South Carolina State University and her Master of Divinity with a focus on pastoral care and counseling from Virginia Union University School of Theology in Richmond, Virginia. Reverend Jenkins spent 12 years working for the United Family Services Shelter for Battered Women as a social worker, counselor, volunteer coordinator, court advocate, and program coordinator. In 1999, she designed and implemented a domestic violence spiritual advocate ministry and educational awareness ministry through the University Park Baptist Church. Reverend Jenkins worked as a chaplain at Emory University Healthcare before serving as the pastoral care coordinator at Wellstar Keystone Hospital in Marietta, Georgia. She returned home to Charleston in 2016 and now serves as the International African American Museum's Lilly Director of Education and Engagement for Faith-Based Communities. The granddaughter of the late Esau Jenkins, a civil rights activist from Johns Island, South Carolina, who was a leader, businessman, and community organizer, Demet has a love for outreach development and community involvement. She volunteers her time with Coastal Crisis Chaplaincy Organization that responds to deaths, homicides, and other crisis situations with both Charleston and the North Charleston Police Departments. So welcome, Reverend Jenkins, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you so very much, everyone. And I know we have heard an amazing presentation from Brenda. And I don't know about you guys, but I could always sit and listen to her because she just inspires me each time she presents. But I'm gonna try not to be before you long because I know our time is up and I want to allow you all to have some questions for us. So as they shared, I am the Director of Education and Engagement for Faith-Based Communities. So my primary role with the museum is to talk about and to meet and greet faith-based organizations. But how this came to be within the museum, that the Lilly, why you see my title Lilly. So we are funded, this position that I'm in is funded by the Lilly Foundation. And so Lilly has given us a $5 million investment to create the Lilly Endowment Faith Fund. And that fund allows for us to engage experts and support research and curation and programming relating to religion and spirituality. So this position funds my position, and we even have a part-time faith-based coordinator that Lilly funds that position as well. And just so you know who Lilly is, it's a family-based company, organization, and started in the 1930s as a pharmaceutical business. And so this endowment, the Eli Lilly and family and company, the endowment supports causes of community development, education, and religion. And what Lilly wanted to make sure is that with all this history that we are going to share and tell at our museum, they wanted to make sure that religion and spirituality was part of the telling of the stories, because we can't really tell those stories without talking about people's faith and their spirituality. So Lilly has supported us in doing so, and that's why we're here today. So I'm commissioned to do three things. To bring awareness about the museum locally, nationally, and internationally. And to also partner and host programs with faith communities, religious schools, seminaries, organizations, anyone that has any faith-based perspective or focus, then we are to make those connections with them. And part of making those connections is to partner and to do programs together. So those programs don't have to be in Charleston. It could be wherever you are. So we can come to you in York, in Charlotte, and nationally and internationally. So we want to make sure that we're doing things together that has a focus on faith, religion, and spirituality. And then thirdly, I'm encouraged to encourage our faith communities to become chartered members of our museum. We certainly want our faith communities to have a footprint, a heart, a space, everything connected to our museum. And so I'm encouraged to do that as well. But primarily, we want to be in relationship and partner and have programs together. So we connect with all faith traditions. So it does not matter what particular denomination, what particular faith tradition that organization is with, we partner with all faith traditions. And so we just want everyone to know that we're not here to just focus on a particular faith or particular culture, that we are faith-based and we want to do education, we want to engage all of our faith traditions and honor and respect them as we should. And so we want to do these programs. So these programs could be a lecture, it could be a forum, it could be a symposium, it could be an event, it could be a talk. So be thinking about that as you're listening to both Brenda and myself tonight. Be thinking about the ways that you can connect with us and to do various types of programs. And so as I shared, my role is to travel around the state and the country to visit congregations and religious institutions and religious communities. And we want to deliver educational content related to faith and spirituality. I can't say that enough. And sometimes people say, now really, you're going to come and do a program with us? Well, we want to sit down and really collaborate and think about what kinds of conversations we want to have, or what kinds of things that we can do to collaborate and partner together to do a variety of types of presentations. So we want you to just be thinking about how you can engage with us and us with you. So some of the programs that we've had so far, we have been on staff since about June of 2018. And so it took us some time just to kind of get acclimated and get to know our community. And then we began to have some programs that the community could be involved in. And so we've had an academic examination of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's teachings, awakening of the ancestors through music. We've done some healthcare programs for end of life. We had a panel discussion. And we've done spiritual care in COVID, reflections from chaplains in funeral homes and clergy. We've had a lot of conversations. A lot of us have seen and been a part of dialogues with our first responders, but we wanted to hear from our chaplains and our clergy and our funeral homes kind of how this was impacting the COVID-19, how had that impacted their work and their ministry. We do a ton of faith-based presentations at senior centers, churches, conventions, church conferences, seminaries, you name it. If there's someone that wants to hear about the work that we're doing in terms of faith-based or just education in general, we are able to present that. And we've done a ton of that work via virtual since the pandemic, but we certainly can come to where you are once we get back to in-person gathering. So Brenda mentioned earlier as one of the exhibitions, the Center for Family History, where we will do African-American genealogy research. And the ways in which the faith-based team works with the Center for Family History, because the Center for Family History is looking for collections of funeral programs, obituaries, marriage license, historical documents. And so as we are traveling and connecting with faith communities, we want to encourage individuals in our faith communities, if you have funeral programs or marriage license, death certificates, we want you to begin to upload those. We have a digital library right now. So if you go to our website, www.iaamuseum.org, and you go to Center for Family History, you will be able to upload right now any historical documents that you have. So when people start to come to our museum, whether they meet with a certified genealogist or they schedule an appointment in time to really begin their family research, names and dates and places and people will already be in this library. So it's extensive already, and we haven't even opened our doors yet. So please do take a look at that. And so as we are going about and talking and presenting and educating, we're trying to encourage people to upload these documents. And if you have, this picture here, this is what I'm really excited about. So for those people who have their family Bibles, and as you can see on this photograph, there's a copy of a Bible where someone has really handwritten all of names and dates and birthdays and all of these kinds of important documentation. We will scan that particular part of someone's Bible, and we will make sure it gets uploaded into the digital library, but we will also give you an acid-free box to continue to preserve that Bible. And so if anyone that has a family Bible that has names and documentation in them, we want to be in touch with them. We want to make sure, one, that they continue to preserve that information. And then two, we want to make sure it's available so that as people are wanting to do their family research, that we have the right documentation of names and dates and places. So isn't that just amazing? I'm so excited about this, and we are trying to do as much outreach and conversation about this particular thing for the museum. So this is also a part of the Center for Family History, and this is an obituary that was written back in 1897. And I just love to read it because it's so eloquently done. And so it says, "We regret to have again to record the death of another one of Mr. W.H. Harris's sons. Little Richard, his son, departed this life last Tuesday night, just 1 month and 3 days after Big Brother Oliver's death. We sincerely condole with the family of the deceased on the dispensation for which it has phased divine providence to afflict them, and commend them for the consolation to him who for things for the best, and whose chastisements are meant in mercy." Now, isn't that just a wordsmith, someone who just eloquently describes the death of this person? And this was done in 1897. So, so folks are already, again, uploading these kinds of documents. And I was just so impressed as I read this. And this shares a lot about what happened and who this person was connected to. And I don't think we write our obituaries in that way today. So we could really learn something from our ancestors back in the 1800s. So again, some of our future faith-based programs that we would love to have and love to be in discussion with is to have on-site classroom discussion, host Bible study discussions, Sunday school lessons about the middle passage and its impact on faith and religion, a church-wide book reading and it doesn't have to just be this book, but we decided that this may be a way to start. Denmark Vesey's Garden, Slavery and Memory in the Cradle of the Confederacy. Submission of stories relating to any community or nationwide event. We have experienced a lot in these last couple of years. And so, maybe there is something that your faith community or religious organization wants to, create an essay contest or just have a writing opportunity for people to express themselves. And we can kind of do that in a programmatic and educational way. Help to highlight the importance that faith traditions and spirituality have played in the African-American history. Student-led forums on faith in the midst of hate. And then conversations about faith to just really talk to people who are from various faith traditions and hear who they are and how they represent themselves in life. So, and these are just some others as well. So I wanted to just make sure that you knew how to reach us. I'm the Director of Education and Engagement. Vereen Parnell is our faith-based coordinator. We are willing to talk with you if you just want to brainstorm, to think about some ideas of how we can collaborate together. We are happy to do that. We're excited to be here tonight. We thank you for the opportunity to share. And if there are other questions, certainly Brenda and I are available.
Hey, thank you so much. Wonderful. Lots of opportunities there as well, and a wide variety of creative ways to think about connecting African-American religion and African-American culture and the place that we live. So we can open this up for questions. You're welcome to type questions in the chat or just raise your hand. Between Greg and I, will keep an eye on the hand raising if there are things that you're curious about or want to comment on.
Can my math speak?
Yes, absolutely.
Is this a physical raising your hand? Okay, okay. Oh, wow. This was awesome. I want to cry. Oh, I am so impressed, so excited. My question to both Brenda and Reverend Jenkins, to Ms. Tindall and Reverend Jenkins, are there any other cities in the state of South Carolina that have been a big part of what you're doing, reaching out to you, supporting, doing things that will not only enhance what you're doing in Charleston, but also in their local communities, because there's a lot going on here in Rock Hill, and I'm so excited to see this. So that's my question.
It's an amazing question. Let me say, we want to connect with every place in South Carolina. We've already done a tremendous amount of outreach through our programmatic efforts, through our outreach work. Both Demet and I, Reverend Jenkins and I, serve on many committees that have a statewide reach, and certainly do lots of work that transcends South Carolina. In particular, just to give you an example, I serve as a commissioner on the South Carolina African American Heritage Commission, which is very much a statewide organization really committed to the preservation of African and African American history and culture. And so that's one of the conduits through which we're able to connect statewide. So that is to say, Sandra, we hope and we know that this is a wonderful group to connect with so that we can do more outreach with Rock Hill and any surrounding community that really is interested and mission aligned with the work that we're doing. So this work is local, national, and international, and whatever we can do to draw those connections, we are excited about the possibilities.
And
Good, thank you. I would like to add one other point. I know because here in Rock Hill, we have a group, African American Cultural Resources Advisory Committee, and we're in the process of establishing a museum or cultural center in Rock Hill. So we will definitely be contacting you. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yes, and I just wanted to say that, I know that people from all over the world will be coming to this museum to visit us. But it is very important for this museum to be placed here in Charleston, South Carolina, in the state of South Carolina. So we definitely want to make sure South Carolinians have a connection and have a place in this museum. We want everybody, but this is our state. And so we want to make sure that the people in this state and the cities within the state have a connection to our museum. So we will go wherever we need to go. So if you have contacts, let us know. We will go.
Thank you.
We have a question.
I have a question
From that someone put in about virtual programs that are currently available for classroom use.
We are actually, we're hiring a documentarian to begin doing some of that work of not only our public programs, but also actual content that can be delivered as part of curriculum. So that is forthcoming. We really hope to have that kind of material available, likely closer to the end of this year, early next year. But we're also very much open to coming to do presentations that begin to draw those clear connections with our content and K through 12 classrooms. We're actively working on developing modules that align with the curriculum. So stay tuned.
I would say you're in a good position too, because we have new standards for social studies.
Yes, I've been. Yes.
So thank you. Ms. Dawson, I think I saw your hand up earlier.
Yes, I second Ms. Oborokumo's motion. I actually attended the College of Charleston years ago for my undergraduate degree over 20 years ago. And one of the reasons I went to the College of Charleston was because of that rich history in Charleston. So I too am overwhelmed with joy and just excited about this time and this moment. And I also am a historian and a storyteller. And so this just truly speaks to me, an author, and I'm just overjoyed. So I'm honored. I'm already a charter member. I already paid my money to be a charter member. And I had a question because I really am intrigued by the idea that you all are willing to go on site. So is there a fee with that? How does that work? I just love that you guys are willing to not only have individuals come into the facility, but also branch out.
Well,
You want to go ahead, Brenda.
So we do have, we're developing a fee structure for our sort of museum beyond walls, museum without walls strategies. But we also understand that right now during COVID, we've tried to be, COVID-19 has really sort of required a different kind of interface with the public. We actually had a moratorium on public programming for the greater part of from March through the end of last year, and we're starting to sort of begin to do a little bit more public interface through our programming. But we're also, you know, one of the exciting things, and I was sharing this with Dr. Gillikin earlier, is that COVID-19 has allowed, has really inspired a sort of creativity and innovation in engaging with new audiences and existing audiences virtually. And so we're really trying to build a strong digital and virtual programming platform. But I'm so ready to be with community. You know, I cannot wait to be inside of a classroom again, or to be in an auditorium, or to be in a church in a more consistent manner. And so we work, we certainly are interested in partnering. That's one of the ways that we've been able to underwrite certain programs is through partnerships. And again, we're developing a fee structure for programming that we'll be delivering off-site. And so it's something that we would love to talk further about. If you're interested in us delivering programs, we certainly would be happy to develop some programming and doing things digitally, but also when things are safe, we certainly would love to do some in-person programming. And I'm also I'm delighted to hear from Sarar on the call, and glad to know that you're here.
I had no idea.
All right, we have a couple of questions from Jim Bradford. I'm gonna kind of put these two together, having to do with records. One question is, do you have slave ship cargo manifest of slaves coming into Charleston, which obviously covers a huge period of time. So, you know, that there's that. And then he also asked if you have or want probate records of estates and property of slave owners for the genealogical department.
Yes, and yes.
Yeah.
We hope to, the Center for Family History will certainly be an important place to collect those kinds of materials, but also through our interpretive footprint, we're actually will be issuing a call for materials and artifacts and objects for very targeted items, and I believe that's one category of collecting that we're really interested in, including the manifest records. So absolutely stay tuned. We want to collect all things that will help contextualize the African and African American experience.
So will you have internships for college students as well to do those kinds of things? That sounds wonderful.
Yes, we're already beginning the process of hosting interns, and have already been in discussion with universities. We've began to develop some pilot internal conversations around fellowships for not just undergraduate students, but also graduate students, and community fellows, advisory boards. I mean, there will be a menagerie of opportunities for students and even community members to really connect in some intentional ways with the museum. Some of that is happening now, but when we open, absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. And Demet may want to add something there because she will be hosting an intern pretty soon, and works very closely with our volunteer corps as well.
Yeah, so you know, we've had interns, I think, Brenda, since we started in June. They were the Reverend Clementa Pinckney scholars. Reverend Clementa Pinckney was the pastor of Mother Emanuel who was killed in the massacre. So there was an endowment that was created for him. And so through that, college students were able to do internships with various organizations since he was very community-based, community outreach kind of person. So, but we've been able to open that door to other folks at the Citadel. We currently will have a Citadel student who will be doing some outreach for us for our South Carolina Connections Gallery, being able to help gather important places and people in the various parts of South Carolina. So he will be working on that. So there's great opportunity. Brenda is overseeing education and engagement. So if you have an interest for a student, grad student or undergrad student, just be in touch with her. There will be a plethora of opportunities, particularly when the museum opens next year.
And if I can add, Dr. Gillikin, I mentioned this earlier, but one of the things that I'm particularly interested in, and I think the museum will be excited to create space for college students who are really interested in careers within public history and museums. And so really creating a space where we can create a pipeline for those that are interested in historic interpretation, museums, public history, cultural preservation. We hope to create some lanes of interns that will be very targeted to those audiences as well.
Thank you. I'm kind of jumping around, but Benita McLean had a question. What kind of program or information do you have for churches that they can submit to their laity about? I guess this is what kinds of programs? Is that the question you're asking? Okay.
Yeah, certainly. If you email me, I'm happy to share information that you can share with your parish. And I'll put my email in the chat.
You can suggest if you do that, that would be nice. And then we have it.
Yes, I'll put that in there now, but definitely whatever information you would like to share with them, we have a form that you can pass along. And if you need additional information, just let me know.
And then another question that's probably might be directed towards you, Reverend Jenkins, is what kind, will the museum address traditional African religions? And how would that happen?
So that's probably a two-part question. It's probably a curatorial question that Brenda can answer. And then there's an education side of that question. So yes, in terms of faith-based education and outreach, we definitely will be addressing all faith traditions. We are looking to meet with several people in the next month or so, particularly who have a focus on African religion, African voodoo, anything connected to that. So we will be we will be hosting those kinds of programs in terms of education.
Okay.
And in terms of in our interpretation, the African Roots, African Routes Gallery is where we will have particular interpretation around African religious traditions and spirituality practices. In fact, we have devoted a portion of our interpretation in our African Routes gallery that focuses specifically on spirituality within the African diaspora and on the continent. So absolutely, that's part of our interpretive plan.
What, in terms of artifacts for the museum, how have you gone about acquiring? Have you purchased things, had things donated? Is a lot of it digital, or all of the above, or some of the above?
That's a great question. We actually we originally started out as a non-collecting institution. And what that really means in practice is that much of the artifacts and objects that we're acquiring and collecting are really meant for our installation, for our visitor experience. So we never plan to have a huge backlog or a large collection for research specific purposes. We really want whatever we collect to be part of the interpretive experience in our galleries. So much of what we're collecting, some of it is donated. Some of the things we're also, obviously purchasing We will be issuing a call for very targeted items. We're partnering with other research and educational institutions that hold collections that inform our interpretive experience. So there are a multitude of ways that we're collecting and acquiring objects and artifacts for our exhibitions.
Museums have changed so much.
Totally.
Modern technology, and that allows you to have digital displays without having to have the space to take care of those items the same way. So that
absolutely. And the other thing, I'm so grateful that you mentioned that, because one of the things that is important to me as a museum practitioner to make the point that museums aren't simply cabinets of curiosity, which is why the work of education and engagement, our department is so important. Museums are hubs for civic engagement. They are spaces for fellowship and interface with community that includes interpretation and guided experiences and workshops and programs. So they serve so many purposes. And so we want to make sure that we're really creating a 21st century institution that has those traditional opportunities of intellectual curatorial experience, but that we're also offering an array, a menu of opportunities for enrichment.
Okay, other questions? Okay, we have a relatively new faith and health coalition in York County, representing 150 faith-based organizations. There's your connection, with many prominently African-American membership, of which I am the secretary. This is from Dave Keeley. We can help disseminate information about your programming, so please reach out to us at faithandhealthyc@gmail.com.
That is awesome. Thank you so much, Dave, for that support. We really need that. And at some point, if there's an opportunity to speak virtually, we would love to be able to come and speak with your group.
All right, other questions or comments?
I'll just say thank you. That sounds great. And should I mainly contact Brenda or you, Reverend?
You can contact me.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Dave.
All right. Did you mention,
yeah, is this available? Is this going to be available? Are you recording? Would this be available later through Race and Reconciliation?
Yes, it'll be on our Facebook page. If you're not connected to our Facebook page, if you send a request, we'll be glad to add you to our, it's a closed group, so we'll be glad to add you to the group. But yes, the presentation has been recorded.
And Dr. Gilligan, we're happy to do a talk back. If you have members of your various groups that may not have been able to make it tonight. I know that there were some competing programs. If you wanted to share the link and have them watch it and have Reverend Jenkins and I come back to answer additional questions as a talk back segment, we're happy to do that as well.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, anything else? Well, I'm just delighted with the participation that we've had tonight and with the content of the program. You've done a wonderful job, and I'm jealous of both of your jobs. I'm sure it is a delight to go to work every day and be able to do this important work, because those stories have not been told, not to the way that they should have. And as someone who works in schools and with social studies education, I know how far short we have come for many years. And so this is a great opportunity to make a change in that.
Well, I stated before that at the heart of what we do in the Education and Engagement Department at the International African American Museum is be in communion, in fellowship with community. And I can tell you, these are the things that I look forward to. I know these are the things that Reverend Jenkins look forward to, because it makes our work real. The idea of our interpretive work, our outreach work, reaching the community, that is what, you know, gives us oxygen. And so we're just grateful for a venue to connect in these socially distanced times, and for the captive audience that you've been. I mean, great questions and just wonderful participation. And we cannot wait to build on this conversation and on this relationship as we look ahead.
Well,
Very good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.